What's up, everybody? I am Dan Wiederer of the Chicago Tribune, joined by my friend Herb Howard from the Bigs. We are in the middle of March Madness NFL style. Herb, how you doing this morning?
I'm feeling pretty good, brother. Feeling pretty good. It is not too often. We were just saying, before we went live, that it's not often where your team is the focus of the entire league. And so that's where the Bears find themselves right now. It's a fun time. Probably more news this offseason than there was throughout the entirety of the regular season.
You're not kidding. It's really interesting because, as I mentioned, at the Combine in Indianapolis last week, it's like all of a sudden people wanted intel from you. Everywhere you went, somebody's, what are the Bears going to do with the number one pick? What are the Bears going to do in free agency? Everybody's curious about what the Bears are going to do with this potentially landmark offseason. And there's just so much juice to it. And then you get back from the Combine and you realize how many different people Ryan Poles talked to, because I spent a big chunk of Monday catching up on all the people he talked to just to make sure I was up to speed with everything that he said. And that's very rare in the last 3 or 4 years of Chicago Bears football, where they're national and they're the big storyline.
Yeah, they were all over the place. You saw them all over, ESPN. They were all on these different podcasts and NFL Network, and they were just kind of making the rounds. And you see, Ryan and Matt together all the time and just talking. And like you said, it's not every year you get to see that from the Bears. So it's a very, very exciting time, and certainly not a place they want to be in regularly, but it's a huge time for them and a big opportunity.
Did you happen to catch Ryan and Matt on the Pardon My Take podcast on Barstool?
I did not see that one. No.
All right. You're going to have to give that a listen, because, as you know, that's a sports and comedy podcast. And they were trying their damnedest to get Matt Eberflus out of football coach mode. And I don't think that they quite got there. not quite the right format for Matt there. But as we mentioned, Ryan's making the rounds. Ryan's talking about the number one pick. Ryan's talking about the offers that he says he has or / thinks he wants to get. And it's up to us a little bit to try to read between the lines, filter through what he's saying to determine what is actually reality and what is just him trying to posture so that people think that there's a bidding war that they have to get into. What do you make of this whole auction that doesn't have a deadline except really until the draft starts for the number one pick?
Yeah, I'd say he's played it right. I think he's played it right for the most part, just in terms of continuing to try and drive up the price, continuing to keep the conversation going, to continue to keep the rumors floating around. I think most people are pretty sure that they aren't going to draft a quarterback, but that rumor isn't dead yet, right? So you just keep those things floating around, and I think that's how you continue to drive up the price for that number one pick, and you can keep the talks going, and maybe we're going to get this player from this team, we're going to trade for this team, and I think he's doing an excellent job at keeping that going. I think part of that was making those rounds you were talking about and talking to all of these different shows and podcasts and hosts and things like that. You want to continue to talk this thing up and continue to have as many scenarios on the table as possible. I think he's doing a phenomenal job with that.
Yeah, some of it is obviously calculated as he tries to get the microphone and the megaphone really and stand up on stage and say, hey, this number one pick's for sale. One of the most interesting nuggets out of the Peter King story on Monday morning was that Ryan believes that he can get a 2024 first and a 2025 first out of a deal for the number one pick. Now, it's one thing to say that publicly. Now, if you come back and you don't get that in a trade haul, folks like you and I are going to go, hold up a second, Ryan. You said in early March that you were going to be able to get, multiple firsts for the next few years out of this deal. So what happened? That is a proclamation that leads you to believe that somebody has at least put an offer on the table. I can't say whether that's true or not, though, because I just have no idea with Ryan's track record how much of this is dancing the dance and how much of it's reality.
Yeah, I think he is kind of, you set the bar that high, satisfaction is directly linked to expectation. And so if you set the expectations this high and then you come in below that, people are going to be disappointed. And so that is an ambitious thing to put out. I do think there's a precedent for it. Just as recently as, was it last year or the year before? I'm trying to blank on which team did that and was actually able to get 2 future ones for it. But if he can pull that off, certainly a huge move for him. And I think there are a lot of teams that really want to move up and draft one of these young quarterbacks. And so he's got an opportunity, but he's going to have to continue to play his cards right. He's going to have to find 2 possible suitors. He needs 2 teams competing against each other. And so if he can get down to the finish line and he has 2 teams that are legitimately trying to get that spot, and he's making each one of them believe that the other team is just a little bit more invested than they are, then he'll have an opportunity. But he's got to continue to talk up these prospects. He's got to continue to hope that these quarterbacks continue to show themselves well in the meetings, in the classroom, on the board, on the field, all those types of things. And so if they can continue to raise their own stock and he continues to sell the possibility, there's no telling how much you can get for it.
You and I have talked in other forums about this. You're trying to create demand. You're also hoping that somebody creates desperation.
Right.
And that's the thing that comes with this number one pick. We know the number of teams that need quarterbacks. We know the quarterbacks that are out there. What we've talked about is the Bears' fatal flaw in 2017 was deciding that there was one quarterback and one quarterback only for them. These other teams around the league should be learning from that, but somebody may not and say, hey, we must have Bryce Young. We won't settle for CJ Stroud, or we must have Anthony Richardson. We won't settle for Bryce Young. And so that's where this gets interesting, because if you're a team like the Colts and you want to kind of sit steady at number 4 and say, well, you know what? We like 3 of these guys, and we think that we can watch the first 2 come off the board, and if so desired, and you know, we want to move to 3, then we can wait till draft night and say, okay, we watched the first 2 come off the board. Now we'll take number 3 at number 3. It's going to be really fascinating to hear post-draft from all these general managers and all these teams on kind of how they assess these quarterbacks and how they found their way to the one that they ultimately picked. Because again, there doesn't have to be only one right answer to that. And when there is only one right answer to that, sometimes you get yourself into a trap that you can't get out of, as the Bears learned.
Yeah, right or wrong won't be defined for, 3, 4, 5 years. When you get to that point where it's time to pick up those 5th-year rookie options, that's when right or wrong will truly be determined in terms of if somebody moved up to get a guy and they don't, give them the 5th-year rookie option, or you see a situation like developed here with Mr. Trubisky, then you'll say, ooh, they were wrong. They could have just kind of set pat and took one of these other guys. But you just, like you said, you just need that little sense of desperation. You need that one team that's standing on the table for this one guy. We have to go up and get this guy. He's head and shoulders above the rest of them. And then you're holding the number 1 pick. And so you can do so many different things. You can say, hey, I love one of these kids, and I'm just going to take him there. And that's fine. So long as it's a 10-time Pro Bowler, that's fine. Right. You can do that.
More often than not, they're not.
More often than not, they're not. That's very, very rare to find. So, but if you do stand there and you go ahead and actually cash in that ticket for one of these prospects, he better be a 10-time Pro Bowler at whatever position he plays. So a lot of options. You got to create that desperation.
Before we cross our bridge into free agency, if you're in Ryan Poles' shoes right now and you've got this number 1 pick, what do you want? What do you want to get out of this? I know he talked at the Combine in Indianapolis about making sure that they are, I don't know if cautious is the right word, but maybe calculated in how far back they move, because you still got to walk out of this draft with a player that you believe is a move the needle, in his verb, starter, right? And somebody that can help you right away and help you for a long time. So what do you need to get out of this, whether it's trading back, staying at number 1, how far you want to trade back? What do you do, Herb Howard, if you're in Ryan's shoes?
Yeah, you definitely got to walk away with the player that is a perennial Pro Bowl performer, regardless. I don't care if you move back to 4, 5, 8, wherever you feel comfortable moving back to, you still have to walk away with a perennial Pro Bowl player. So just pushing the ball down the road a little bit, say, hey, we got number 1 next year. Even if you get another one for 25, that's fine, but you still need a difference maker on this team this year. And so that matters too. So for me, he's got to be able to get a difference-making player at the top of that draft, somewhere top 5, top 10, wherever it's going to be. And he's also got, if I'm him, I want to accumulate more picks for the future. So I'm going to trade back. I need a 1st-round pick for next year. If you can find a way to get one for 25, now you're hitting it out the park. But certainly I would want to trade back. I want another 1st-round pick for next year. Obviously, we're going to trade 1st-round picks this year, maybe your 2nd this year, and I still need to hit on a player. So I don't want to lose that part of it, right? I think we talk about moving back and we talk about how many 1st-round picks he can get and 2nd-round picks and those types of things. He still has to hit wherever he goes. If he drops back to 4 or 5, he still has to hit on that player too. So for me, you got to hit on that player and you got to accumulate some picks going forward. I would definitely be looking to trade down. I wouldn't go any further than I feel absolutely certain that I can have a player that I love. So if it's only 4 or 5 guys that I truly, truly love, that I would say, hey, I'd be comfortable with this guy, even if I had to pull the trigger on him at 1. If there's only 4 or 5 guys like that, then that's how far you can go back. You move back that far, factor in who's going to take the quarterbacks, and then you get your guy, but you also get the 1st-round picks going forward. So that's what I would be looking to do, more so than even taking one at the top. But you got to get a guy in this draft too.
Yeah, you got to figure out where that floor is. The Bears also only currently have 3 picks in the top 100, and Brad Biggs and I got some buzz from Indy of teams saying, look, like there's obviously a lot of buzz around this number 1 pick, but they're not in an ideal position for the striking value phase of the draft, which a lot of people feel like day 2 and early day 3 is a spot where there's a lot of difference-making players that you can grab, and the Bears don't have a lot of selections there. So the more capital you can add in that range, certainly that helps your cause in the short term.
And the Bears have been able to do well there too. Over the past, several years, the Bears have been able to do well in that part of the draft. And so you would like to see them, accumulate a few more picks in that area because they have been able to get some difference makers, in that range of the draft.
Yeah, we always talked about Ryan Pace being really good on the early parts of day 3 and not so good on the early parts of day 1, which you kind of want to flip that at some point. I also found it interesting, Herb, that as high as Ryan has set the bar for that number 1 pick, he's kind of set a lower bar for free agency. And I appreciate that the messaging he's had out there. And I'll start this conversation with this and we can expand from there. But franchise tag day deadline passed on Monday, and the Kansas City Chiefs did not put the franchise tag on Orlando Brown. Now, they still have a week to try to negotiate a longer-term extension with Orlando Brown and keep him around. They can let him walk into the market and then say, hey, we'll take the right to, match whatever offers you get out there, and we'll figure out what it looks like from there. But Orlando Brown, obviously a guy that Ryan Poles has history with from Kansas City. Orlando Brown, obviously one of the guys in the top 10 lists of free agents in a modest free agency class in 2023. Orlando Brown obviously would fill a need on an offensive line that has needs front to back, side to side. What are your takes on how they manage that situation as they keep a pulse on it?
Listen, I think that would be an ideal scenario for them if they can find themselves in a position where they can truly go out and get Orlando Brown. That's an ideal situation. Now, they may have to overpay for him because, as you said, the Chiefs can say, hey, we'll just go ahead and match it. Well, you said something that they don't want to match, right? You've got the money to do it. You're in a position to be able to do it. You might have to overpay for it. You'll probably have to overpay for it, but that's okay. This isn't the time for, fans and the reporters say, oh, they're spending too much money. Stop counting them people money. They got a lot of it. Don't worry about it, okay? They need players. What they don't have a lot of are difference-making players. They got a lot of money, okay? So don't stop counting them people money. It's fine, right? If they have to overpay for it, then go ahead and overpay for it. I didn't foresee this actually coming to fruition. I know it's something that we were always talking about, and there were whispers and rumors and, hey, wouldn't it be great? Yeah, it would have been great. I didn't necessarily see it coming to this. If it actually comes to that, the Bears should open up their wallets, write the check for whatever it's going to be, and get one piece absolutely solidified on the offensive line and then start to build the rest around it. So I think it would be an ideal situation. They'll just probably have to overpay for it if that's the term you want to use.
So it is a term I want to use because this is where the pushback from inside the walls at 1920 Football Drive will come back, because two of the words that Ryan continues to use are discipline and value.
Sure.
And he wants to be disciplined in free agency. And it's why I say he's set a lower bar for free agency than he has for that number 1 pick, because I think he has this vision of understanding, like, they're not in, I've called it splurge and surge mode right now, where you spend now and then you get this express ramp to success. Like they understand that to build long-term success, they've got to piece by pieces, and Ryan says stair step it up to success. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how he navigates that, because I do think he's willing to overpay to a point. And sure, the one thing that we have in our back pocket is understanding what he did with Roquan Smith, who obviously was pushing. And Ryan was like, well, we're willing to overpay to this point. And Roquan's like, well, we want you to overpay to this point. And then Roquan goes and gets a deal in Baltimore for $100 million in 5 years. And you say, okay, well, the Bears weren't willing to open up the wall from one of their homegrown stars, and they kept their feet dug in, and they had a level of value that they valued Roquan on, and they didn't go beyond it. So I'm fascinated with all this flexibility that Ryan is in free agency to see how firm he is in that regard. I think in 2 weeks from now, we're going to look back and go, okay, he was willing to spend because he had it to spend, or, oh man, he was a little more frugal because he's got a more calculated vision on this thing.
I think it's a very nuanced situation. When you talk about value, it's very, very relative. It's relative to a lot of things, relative to where you are as a team in terms of your roster development and your process to trying to build a championship team. It's relative to the position that each individual player plays and how much you value that position on your team. And so maybe inside linebacker just isn't one of those premier or hot spot positions for Ryan Poles, for Matt Eberflus, for this team in particular, or, so maybe that's just not something that they wanted to do. But you talk about, protecting the franchise. If that's what you view Justin as, then that may be one of those premier positions in which you do have that level of value for. And so it's a sliding scale. That's not so much, hey, this is what happened for Roquan, so this is what we have to do at left tackle, or this is what we have to do at defensive end. It's a different situation when you weigh that value based on each individual case. And so I think that he can still be sincere when he's saying, hey, I don't want to be foolish. I don't want to be wasteful. I want to be disciplined. I want to do those types of things and get value. But that value looks different based on the scenario and the person.
It took us 13 plus minutes to mention Justin. And I think you make a very astute point there, because this is the season that we need to learn everything about Justin Fields. Year 3, you go look from 2011 to 2020 and beyond, the quarterbacks that have been drafted in the first round, and almost to a T, you've known after year 3 whether that guy is truly the guy or whether he's not. You can go down the list and see where those guys were after year 3. And so it's imperative that the Bears, starting with Ryan Poles in free agency, get Justin the resources he needs to do the best he possibly can in his development. And to your point, having a stalwart offensive tackle on the left side that gives you a little more of that comfort, that then creates confidence, that then creates command. Now all of a sudden you've got something there. And so that I'm with you that there are certain positions that if you are going to be fair to Justin Fields, you have to make sure that you walk into OTAs in May and say, we locked that down. We took everything we had in this offseason, whether that's on the offensive line, the receiving core, which I will throw tight ends in that mix. You got him help, right? I mean, and that's part of the next step here for Ryan Poles is get Justin help.
That's the only way you can be sure and confident with whatever decision you make about him going forward, right? It's going to be time to say, hey, 5th-year rookie option or no, right? Those types of things. And so you got to be sure and confident when you make that decision. And the only way to do that is to say, hey, we've given him everything that he needs to be successful. It's not his, second year in a new offense. He's got some stability here. He's got some familiarity in terms of the system that he's trying to run. It's not our first season as a regime just coming in trying to evaluate things. It's not his rookie year where he didn't get a lot of reps in training camp and things like that. This is not that situation. This is a situation where he should be able to come in, show marked development, and we have to put everything around him that we can. So get him the offensive line, get him the legitimate number 1 receivers, get him everything he needs to be able to be successful. And then if he's not, then you can say, we'll walk away from this thing comfortable with our 2024 first round pick that we got from the Colts or the Texans or whomever, right? And so then you can make that decision with a little bit more confidence as opposed to saying, well, did we just not get him enough? Is he that guy still? You can walk away from it confident and say, hey, we did what we're supposed to do. I've been, supportive of Justin Fields. I think he is that guy. I think he is a franchise quarterback. But if you give him a NFL offensive line and you give him a legitimate number 1 receiver to put with what would then become a truly formidable passing attack in terms of wide receivers with Chase and Mooney and Cole, and like you have some real guys, you can get him also a legitimate number 1. So if he doesn't hit it with those things around him, I'll be the first to say maybe he's not that guy. And if you want to move on, then fine. And even if you do move on and he goes to have a better career, then you say, hey, with everything they had, I understood why they made that decision. But you have to know for sure, and to know for sure, you got to get him what he needs. No question. And then one last piece of housekeeping to that end. For those curious about a timeline on this, you mentioned the 5th-year option. That comes up after year 3 for quarterbacks, and we're all rookies or all guys on rookie deals that have been picked in the first round. And so the 5th-year option in May of 2024 is something the Bears have to decide on after year 3. And now, because of the new CBA that was signed during COVID in a couple of years ago, that 5th-year option is immediately guaranteed. It didn't used to be. And so 14 months from now, the Bears have to make a decision on whether they want to guarantee Justin Fields' salary for his 5th season, not just his 4th season. And so it becomes a situation where this year has to tell them a lot to inform that decision, because once you lock that 5th-year option, now all of a sudden the talks of an extension kick in, and those extensions, as you know, continue to go up, up, up. There's going to be some quarterbacks this year that are going to reset the market a little bit for what the middle tier is able to make and what the top tier is able to make, and we know where it's all headed. By the time this season is over, and really, by the 3rd quarter of this season, they should be sure whether or not they've got a $300 million quarterback or they're hitting the reset button. By that point, they'll know, are we giving this dude $300 million or are we starting over? And that's not a lot of time to be sure about that. That's not a lot of time to be sure about that based off what we have seen from him, what we haven't seen from him. That's just not a whole lot of time to be sure about that. But that's where they are because of that, 5th-year option coming up. You're going to want to know those types of things sooner than later. And we have this clock in our head like, oh, they got to 2025 to figure this out. No, they don't. They really don't have that much time to figure this out. And so by the end of this season, they need to know if he's that guy. And if he is, then you give him the 5th-year rookie option. You continue to get him on that rookie deal for a couple more years. That Super Bowl window is there for you. But again, you won't know that. At least you can't comfortably walk away from that if you don't get him the pieces around him to truly, truly be successful and give him an opportunity to make the jump that you saw with a Jalen Hurts when he has the best offensive line in the league, when he has, A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith. Like you put the weapons around him and see if he can reach that level. And if he can, you got your guy. If he can't, you probably don't. I have 2 words to summarize all you just said. Tick-tock.
right? The clock is ticking, and it's ticking in a lot of different ways. Free agency's coming, the draft is coming, the decision on Justin is coming, and we're coming hard at you with all sorts of Bears info and analysis. Herb Howard, thanks for joining me.
Always a pleasure, Dan. Appreciate you.